Good afternoon, and thanks again to Safe and Robbie and the team for having us here today. So the title of this panel is Principled Investing in Energy and Critical Minerals, and principled is a operative word there because it's a very difficult sector to invest in, and I think principled in a way stands for doing the things that meet our national priorities, societal needs. So before we get into, let me introduce you to it, before I introduce you to our panelists, it struck me over listening the last couple of days that investors have to navigate between two poles. One is that idea of a holistic framework that comprehends national security goals, societal objectives, and offers adequate or attractive risk-adjusted returns. That's what we're trying to do. The other, I think that other pole to maneuver around is simply a perpetuation of the free-for-all that I'm struck is how investing in mining is right now. It's a very, very challenging industry, a very challenging sector to invest in. So we're going to talk about how to navigate those two poles. And we have three distinct type of investors today. This is really a special opportunity. Owen Hegarty, whose background is an operator, is an investor today, but he's a long experience as an operator in the business. Charles Cherington is a very experienced private equity investor in multiple energy verticals. And Dr. Jason Rathje, who is, of course, a public sector strategic investor. So an operator, private equity investor, and a strategic investor. And before we get going, and I dare say probably almost a century of experience in this space, if you count some of my years. And the confession I have to make is I'm not an energy or mining investor. My experience is in the auto industry, which I've been in for 40 years. And it's pretty clear to me that the economics, that since the car of the future will be in great part made up of these refined critical minerals, that the economics of the critical minerals industry will have a huge impact on the economics of the auto industry. So there's, the autos being a major application of these materials, this has profound consequences, the kinds of decisions that these gentlemen will be making. So, and I'd say, look, that's not news to anybody in the industries, but the extraordinary gains that the Chinese have made in electric cars make this an urgent matter. So I want to start maybe with a question for the whole panel, and then we'll get into some individual questions. For what you do, what has been the impact of the latest sort of geopolitical volatility, the executive order, any of the kinds of events that you think are really important and that have been impacting your way of looking at the world? And maybe I'll start with you, Owen.
Thanks, John. And thank you, by the way, for the opportunity to join your panel, and thank you to SAFE for putting on an absolutely wonderful conference here these 2 days. Robbie and Abigail and the rest of the team. Very, very good. In terms of our background, as you said, we are EMR Capital. We're mining only. We do it out of Australia and multiple other countries around the world. We focus on copper, gold, base and precious metals, critical minerals and metals. And in the bulk commodities, we're into metallurgical coal, so an energy source in a way, and also potash, so it's fertilizer and food source. So we've got a good range, I suppose, of commodities there. In terms of geopolitical developments and so on that are occurring, we're always on the lookout for what is going on. Of course, we're business people at the end of the day. We follow the market, we follow the money, we follow the trends. We follow the regulator, of course, and we also follow best international practice as far as we possibly can. So always on the lookout. In terms of the so-called energy transition, transition to renewables, emissions reductions, decarbonisation, however you want to characterise it, that has been a very big development, top-down driven over the past, 5, 10, 15 years in a way. And it is a topic clearly of this particular discussion. And it's driven us in a way to focus more on energy and energy security as a company, let alone a nation, so as to speak, because it is a large part of our operating cost and obviously forms a large part of capital cost. So it's probably a third of our operating cost, energy, in terms of electricity, fuels and so on, a third labour, a third energy and a third materials is pretty much the way it falls. So that's been an important focus on to drive down not only the cost of it, but to get access to it and to have reliable power coming to your operation. I mean, you don't want to be stopping midstream. You don't want an aluminium pot line that has stopped because you've run out of electricity, a brownout or blackouts we were talking about a little bit earlier. So definitely a focus on energy and the places you can go to access reliable, affordable, competitive energy. So that's a particular focus. The other thing, John, in respect of the change and the attitude change here, the recent executive orders change here, is very important. We see it as a threshold event. I don't know whether it's a Sputnik moment or not for us type of thing, but it's certainly a threshold. And to get the encouragement, to get the impetus, to get that sort of confidence back in investing here in America. We have a couple of projects here, terrific endowment in this part of the world. So it's given us a greater emphasis and confidence to come and invest here, John. So there's a bit of a rabbiting on there, but you mentioned that sort of geopolitical change and more recent executive order and so on has given us that drive to do those things.
And so to put a fine point on it, in the world you're used to operating in, which is full of political volatility, commodity prices, all kinds of things that make it very hard to be successful, but you've obviously been very successful. I guess you would say when your investment committee sits around, it says, this is a really good thing, what's happening right now. It will make it more attractive to be in the business we're in. You're clear about that in your mind. That
the need for more capital?
Yeah.
Well, certainly, if we're going to do all of these things, I mean, we are supply-side people, so we have to do those things. We add a little bit to demand, but not very much. We're mainly supply people. I mean, our view about the longer term, by the way, has not changed, and we're in for a long period of strong economic growth and demand for commodities. No question about that. And you've seen the boost with the so-called energy transition. AI. Some of these things are just going to give strong boost to demand. Bound to be humps and bumps along the way here. Bound to be all of those. But the long-term force and direction is perfectly clear. It's the supply side where the issue is. We've got to play catch-up football here in terms of building that supply. And therefore, it's very heartening for us to see the response of the US here in terms of more critical minerals and metals to be mined here, for example, and you are seeing greater access to capital, or certainly all of the words to that effect anyway, in terms of greater access to capital, John.
Thank you. So Charles, I'd like to ask you the same question, and maybe also you can talk a little bit about your background, because you've been in private equity world for quite a while. You've covered a lot of sectors. And why don't you tell people about that, and then we can get into what your attitude is right now about the political environment.
Sure. So Ara Partners is a private equity firm focused on industrial decarbonization, building new plants to do that. So we are a builder firm. You don't want me building your plant as a private equity guy. That would go very badly. You wouldn't want me flying your 747. You wouldn't want me operating on your knee. And building plants is no different. If we're going to have domestic manufacturing resurge in the way that we all hope, and by the way, that was a priority of the Biden administration, and it is going to be a priority of the Trump administration, you got to know how to build plants. And private capital is famously bad at doing that. So Ara was set up to be a firm that is good at it, and we are able to land plants on time and on budget with a pretty high degree of reliability at this point. We have plants and operations in 24 states, and even though we focus on decarbonization, overwhelmingly in red states. I'm a Democrat, but I'm the first to admit you can't get things built in most blue states. Red states are much more favorable to the formation of new industrial enterprises. So we invest across decarbonizing conventional energy. Our view is fossil fuels are not the enemy. Fossil fuels are going to be around for a long time. It's great that we have all of this effort in nuclear fusion and advanced modular reactors. I'm not holding my breath. I want them. I think they're the one thing that can really dramatically change the future of the planet. But the human collective is in the way of mass deployment. So in the meantime, solar and wind are lovely as far as they go, but they're going to be a slice of a pie, not the pie itself. And so you either ignore conventional fossil fuels, conventional commodity production, let's say blast furnaces for steel. You can ignore that and pretend that the emissions aren't happening, or you can partner with those forms of production and help to find lower carbon ways to make them operate as we await sort of future energy or industrial utopia. And by the way, the cold hard facts are that's a long way away. It takes a long time to build things. As an example, in transmission in the US, we need to accommodate all the new forms of energy we have an estimated 280,000 miles of transmission. In 2023, we built 50. 50. And that's because you can't build things in this country, particularly when you're dealing with multiple jurisdictions or complex infrastructure. What you can build are plants, and so where we really focus are building plants that make materials critical to national security, critical to the economy, and we really focus on that from a processing perspective. The mines are critical, but if you don't have that intermediate processing after you dig the dirt out of the ground, all you're doing is handing the football back to China yet again. In fact, they control more processing than they do mining. And so we have 4 companies today that are processing either rare earth materials or other critical minerals and converting those into finished products. So that's one of the other things that we do. We have a variety of other sort of enterprises surrounding security, decarbonization. We operate in the US and Europe and are quite excited about, I think, number one, permit reform. Getting things built more quickly is absolutely critical. It's a tall order. You know, there are, just as an example, over 3,000 utilities in the United States. Every local jurisdiction has a right to talk about, let's say, long-haul transmission or complex infrastructure. That has to be structurally reformed, or we're not going to be able to solve our energy demand problem. Energy demand, as many people know, was flat until a few years ago, and it's growing 2.5% a year, which is a spectacular number. Yet you can't build transmission, you can't build new plants without extremely challenging regulatory and permitting issues. So the regulatory reform push is extremely important. Permitting reform. The second thing I'd say is providing the capital to get first of a kind, maybe mining operations, it may be processing operations off the ground so that we can start to get down the cost curve and use private capital, public capital to deploy those more rapidly. We see a lot of movement there, and I think that's an essential part of what this administration is trying to accomplish.
And Charles, I'm going to come back to ARA and maybe how you look at deals and some specifics, but in terms of putting a bow on that, are the recent developments, when you sit with your investment committee, has this made you more bullish in terms of your ability to solve these supply side problems? Or is it just another chapter of, complexity and volatility? Did you guys say, wow, this is great?
Well, we just talked to one of our larger LPs, and they said, we have come to the conclusion that we are going to aggressively do nothing for the foreseeable future. So I think there's a certain amount of waiting to see what the diagnosis of problems that this administration has undertaken, to see how that translates into policy and into action. I think the diagnosis of, regulatory complexity, permitting complexity, I would say, for instance, in the mining space, the lack of kind of public-private partnerships to really counteract what China has done to dominate global mining. Those are all worthy goals, but how that translates into policy remains to be seen. So we're hopeful about it. We think the diagnosis of problems is spot on in many cases, but it's just too soon to say. it would be too soon in any administration.
Right.
Exactly what that means from a policy perspective.
It's a really important point. We'll come back to it. Jason, you, I think, have a perspective that is complementary because your role in this process is a little different, but very important. Can you start by maybe first talk about your reaction to the latest events, and then use this as an opportunity to explain what your office does if everyone here doesn't know it?
So first off, thanks again for having OSC here today, and it's great to hear the comments. It's also wonderful to go last, so I appreciate you guys hitting the top points right off the bat. Office of Strategic Capital is a public sector organization. We're inside the United States Department of Defense. You could think of us like a bank within DoD, and our mission is to attract and scale private capital for national security. Why? Because today we're in a global power competition, and in that competition, private capital is the dominant source of financing multiple arenas of competition. Our start at OSC was really focused on emerging and critical technologies. And I think that was our first foray into the critical mineral space, because as you look towards some of the more recent events, like export restrictions and how they impact our R&D side of the house in the Department of Defense, the US Department of Defense owns somewhere between 60 to 80% of the US's R&D budget. So it certainly has an impact directly into our R&D enterprise when our R&D folks, our S&T folks, can't get access to the critical minerals they need to do their work. And then we've continuously gone downstream from that, from early stage R&D into core industrials, and all the way through supply chain choke points. And our assessment of the current environment is one in which the DoD has long recognized the need to access, stockpile, and have available critical minerals for the Department of Defense. The Defense Logistics Agency has owned the critical minerals stockpile for the United States for the last 50 years or so, and that's not just defense, it's also defense and critical infrastructure. It's 77 unique, I believe 77, maybe more now. I heard backstage one more got added, so but it's a significant number of the critical minerals for the United States. That is within the Department of Defense enterprise to ensure that we have stockpiled the critical minerals that are required for the operation not only of the Department of Defense, but also our critical infrastructure. So as OSC, as a fairly new office, we've been around for about 2 years now, has expanded its remit. Critical minerals has always been in our focus. Now, over the last few months, with this executive order, what we've seen is a massive growth around the interagency with a strategic prioritization from the White House to drive investment into domestic critical mineral production and processing, which is directly beneficial to the US Department of Defense. So I think it's a problem set we've known for a long time, and now we've seen this much more expanded remit. For example, OSC was just authorized to make investments into critical minerals about 4 months ago.
Just 4 months ago.
Just 4 months ago, in the latest NDAA. So it certainly is, from my lens, a bipartisan issue with now a strategic focus to expand investment in these areas. And today we operate kind of two main investment platforms. We have one where we work directly with investors, where we can partner in new investment funds, provide leverage into those funds, in return for them investing into areas that we think are important to national security. We have 18 funds operating today. Again, mostly are focused on the critical technology side, but we're now eagerly expanding into critical minerals. The second, and that's also referenced in the executive order. The second platform we operate is a direct-to-company direct lending program, which again is focused on a number of priority areas, critical minerals being one. But we just released, as of yesterday, the results from the first application opening on that platform, because it just started a few months ago, and we received $9 billion of credit requests in 30 days. For us, that well exceeds our authorized credit limit from Congress, but about $1 billion of those applications were focused in critical minerals in areas like aluminum, magnesium, copper, nickel, graphite, lithium, tungsten, and a few others. So certainly it's an area of expanded interest for us. It's an area where the United States is not only focused in expanding its reach and its support to, but also direct investment dollars into. And we're just one of a number of interagency partners, whether that's the Development Finance Corporation, the Export-Import Bank, the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office that is really focusing on investing in these areas today. And certainly we see a lot of excitement to expand access to the full value chain of the critical minerals that we think are most important to national security.
And so what process do you use? I mean, obviously your message is getting out if you've got $9 billion of credit requests. What process do you use to reach the Owens of the world, the Charles of the world, and the institutional investors out there? How do they know what you're doing?
Well, I think it's great conferences like this. I got to meet these two gentlemen backstage for the first time, which is fantastic. I think the focus for us has really been driving products to market and then making sure that we can execute on those products in an efficient capacity such that the interest from partners that are farther up the value chain, to be frank, and have more expansive investment opportunities that they're seeking in these areas, can recognize the U.S. government as a good partner. We see this as a good public-private partnership opportunity. Everything we do is as a public-private partnership because on our side, we're looking not only to achieve national security outcomes, but also looking to return the money back to the taxpayer, right? We're the only Department of Defense organization that literally returns money back to the taxpayer, right? Because it's a bank, so it's primarily debt-based. By working directly with private sector partners, we can both de-risk investments for the U.S. taxpayer's interest, and at the same time, drive potential return to the taxpayer. So it's a great opportunity to do this as a partnership. In addition to that, private sector partners have been in the area, exploring these areas for much longer than certainly OSC has. And so finding opportunities where there's useful collaboration is important, but we see it as a market-facing tool. So we have a list of priorities, and we're going to see what the market's willing to bear. And if the market is interested in partnering on those opportunities, we can pursue them with speed, and if they're not interested in pursuing those opportunities, that's also good for the government to know, because if it's still important to the government, it's going to have to find other ways to capitalize, invest, and grow those types of investments. And so I think critical mineral space is a great example of that, because there's a number of these minerals that I haven't heard really talked much about these past couple days that are really important to the Department of Defense, and I don't know if there's an economic case to be made. And so part of this conversation is understanding where can we do work together, and where do we have to find alternatives.
And so just one more question for now. Do you want to take this opportunity to highlight some of the top priorities that your office is working on?
So we have in our investment strategy we published a couple months back, we have 17 areas of particular interest that we're targeting. Critical minerals is really a new area for us in terms of the strategic focus. So I don't think we're quite ready to go to market with what our kind of 1 through N list is on the mineral.
Let's stay in touch with them.
But it'll be important for us to make sure that we work closely with the Department of Defense and understanding what the requirements are, understanding what the military needs are, and then being able to go out to market to ensure that we have some kind of domestic value chain for those items. Because at the end of the day, we want to have, whether that's critical minerals, whether that's industrials, we want to make sure that we de-risk our supply chains for national and economic security, which per our direction from Congress are equally important in our mandate. And so we look at this not just as a defense-only requirement, we're looking at commercial applications, just as DLA has to focus on defense need and critical infrastructure. It's more than just kind of core defense demand, it's also seeking what is the broader US industrial demand, and how do we ensure that we can create some kind of resilient, secure supply chain, either within the United States or in partnership with our allies, to ensure that we can meet that demand.
Wonderful. So I want to come back to, unless anybody has a reaction to that, I didn't mean to cut you off. You want to say something?
Well, just a reaction there to Jason. Very, very good, by the way. And just picking up on the point in respect of the public-private partnership, if you like. And a very good example, by the way, is the project that we do have here in Utah, actually, and it is good to go. It's a critical mineral. It's potash. It'll go for 50 to 100 years. We just got to get it going. Got to get it started. And that, I think, very good point that Jason makes there in terms of actually, well, we're there to. We're there to support. We're not BHP or Rio Tinto here. It's a single project. We're private equity and we're good at what we do, but we've got to get it started.
Yeah.
And I think they're exactly the sort of, that's exactly the sort of encouragement you need to get it going. We can build it. We'll build it on time, on schedule, on budget, and it'll operate to 50 to 100 years, and it'll be best in class, and the product will be delivered directly to the farmer. So there'll be no issue about processing and so on. Just got to get it started. And I think that's a very good example there. The other one a bit further south in terms of that's more in the wheelhouse of the metals, if you like, the copper and zinc and other metals that come with that, even gold. I see gold has actually made it to the critical minerals list.
Yeah, right.
We used to joke about we were applying to have gold on the critical minerals list because we think it's critical that everybody should have some. But now it's actually officially made it to the list because, of course, it's a great store of wealth as well as a currency and a commodity. But I think that cooperation point, Jason, really rings true, and you know, we should be taking more advantage of that.
Well, if I could just jump in, I mean, I was in the Middle East visiting investors a few weeks ago, and I got pulled aside by somebody from the Saudi Arabian electric company, and they said, look, can you just go back and tell your government that, and this was a direct quote, China is just kicking your ass. Everything we buy, you know, if it's tenders for power equipment, if it's electric vehicles, if it's critical minerals, they're just outcompeting you on cost, they're outcompeting you on terms, they're much more aggressive. I mean, we're in an economic war right now, make no mistake about it, and China is a formidable foe. So I think what you're describing as a program is just the beginning. I mean, first of all, how about a couple more zeros in front of the money you have to allocate? When you're talking about developing big mines, that would consume your whole budget on part of one mine for one commodity. Never mind the processing, never mind all of the other, you know, kind of components, whether it's finished manufacturing of the goods that those minerals ultimately go into consist of. So this is going to have to be a big effort and in my view, a fundamental rethinking of how government and private capital and the private sector work together. And government is going to have to play a much more muscular role, just as it has in China. If you don't have that government involvement, both in terms of political support, security support, if you're operating in tricky jurisdictions where a lot of mines are located, and you don't have the financial support to get things going, the private sector can't do it by itself. So it's not just rhetorical support and cooperation, it's going to require real dollars and a fundamental rethinking of how government works with the private sector.
I think maybe just to add on to that, because we mentioned the Sputnik moment earlier, you know, I referenced Sputnik in a lot of our OSC one-on-one discussions because the US government, after Sputnik crossed their skies, created 3 organizations, DARPA, NASA, and the Small Business Administration, specifically focused on the Small Business Investment Company, SBIC program, which led to the birth and growth of the US venture capital asset class. At one point in the late 1960s, 2/3 of all venture capital is backed by the US government, not just supported by, but the dollars that match with private equity to do venture. Why? Because we were getting our socks beat off us by the Soviets in the technology competition, right? Sputnik literally lit a fire under the United States to drive investment dollars into the areas that we needed to compete. And we did it. We did it very successfully, right? Companies like Intel, Sun, Apple, Cray, all received critical or initial investments from small business investment company investors backed by the US government. And I think it is a great sign of how these public-private partnerships have worked in the past, how the capital markets and the US government can work closely together to make sure that we can drive investment in these areas. And you know, from the lens of the Department of Defense, honestly, if we can get more private capital dollars flowing into these areas to make these investments that are aligned to our national security interests, it's fantastic, right? It takes the burden off the taxpayer, it puts good, smart money into making these investments, and the drive of this as a flywheel effect ensures that we have access to what we need when we need it.
Well, I think we have 42 seconds left. There's so much I want to ask you about. It's a very complicated subject, but I guess the way I'd sum up what I hear now is, you know, the U.S. government is leaning forward in a very big way. You run one very important office, but one of many. It hasn't quite gelled into what happened in that Sputnik moment, but that's probably what it takes. And I guess I'd also say when I listen to Owen And Charles, it's what I hear all the time in my business as an investment banker. There is a great deal of private capital there. There's a lot of dry powder and all these measurements about private equity. But as Charles said, we're aggressively doing nothing at the moment. As LP, we're at a moment where we might be able to unleash this in very large scale if the U.S. government is able to lean in a holistic and organized way. So I think this is a big moment. And this is why you guys ought to exchange business cards after we're done here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.